August 31st, 1862. Dear Father and Mother, I received yours yesterday, and as I have a few leisure moments, I will try to answer. My enlisting was quite unexpected to myself as to my friends. The time for enlisting was so short that I had to go in at the time I did or lose the bounty and then perhaps be drafted, and I never would go as a drafted soldier. My health is not as good as it should be for a soldier, but I can go and stand it as long as I can, and I can't more than die. And if I should die, I shall be released from all further labor, sorrow, or sickness, or trouble. And don't doubt but that my Heavenly Father, who drafts all things well, will take good care of me, although I don't pray in public as much as I used to, and make as much to do about religion as some. Yet I recollect that all I have comes from God, and I admire and respect Him above all things else, and feel that He won't permit me to be killed or die without it at least being best. And when He calls for me, I have no right to be unwilling to go, for I belong to Him, and He can do as He sees fit with me. Thank you kindly for your prayers and well wishes, for we all need the sympathies of each other. It seems that you are recruiting the light infantry some at home. That's the way to do it, for we are going to want soldiers for some time yet. Charlie Reed, Aunt Pamela's boy, is in Dubuque and soon will be here in camp. He enlisted in one of the Clayton County companies. I had a letter from William last night. His family was well. I saw Orville the night before I came away. They were all well. You can direct your letters to Camp Franklin, 21st Regimental Iowa Volunteer, Dubuque, Iowa. I am glad to hear that you have so much fruit and that you are all well. You can send me those likenesses just as well as if I was in Strawberry Point, but I must stay. Give my love to all the friends, and believe me, your affectionate son, Charles H. Page. And then on the back of the letter he wrote, I cannot write very well as I have to write with a board on my lap as we have no tables to write on. So a very interesting letter as he speaks about the potential of death and what his being in service really means to him. Charles Page was 27 years old from Strawberry Point, Iowa when he enlisted in 1862. He served throughout the war and ended up being discharged at the end of the war and lived in Dubuque or Strawberry Point thereafter. The second letter I have was written about a month later. We're not sure the soldier that wrote it, but we do know that it came from Waterloo, or that the soldier came from Waterloo. Dubuque, September 14th, 1862. Dear Mother, I am seated with pen in hand for the first time in this city since the departure of Cook's company from Waterloo. Our journey was performed with no important incidents, the slight sprinkle of rain not dampening the enthusiasm of the boys so as to prevent the continuous cheering as the train passed juvenile patriots and those of more mature age, throwing to the breeze hats, handkerchiefs, flags, etc. We arrived at the depot, passed through the mud up into the city, charming the Times, the Dubuque Times, the newspaper, as we halt for a moment in front of their offices, then on back to Main Street and halt on the sidewalk until the arrival of some of our officers who had gone to report and look for quarters. He at length returned and we took up our baggage and line of march were conducted to Turner Hall, a three-story building which somebody commenced for a theater but were not able to finish, and it is now used for a more laudable purpose. 6 quarters for Uncle Sam's boys, for which it is quite well adapted, and the ticket desk on the second floor serves me at present for a writing table. We get our meals in the same building, which, by the way, are rather better than Sherman horse rations of raw beef and rank butter. The Union County Company was quartered with us, or rather in the same building, for they removed to another room when we took possession of one end and gave us to understand that they did not wish to associate with our company for a few days, but they are gone to the barracks, thank fortune, and are going to separate to a separate regiment. Let them go and the sympathy of Waterloo with them. We know we are wicked boys, but we will try and do something for our country if we can't wear kids, and we shall find friends somewhere. Remember, I have been to see the 21st Regiment on dress parade twice. They are encamped at Camp Franklin about 2 miles from here. They have been expecting to leave soon, but I suppose will now await Pope's orders. I saw John Matthews among them, who, by the way, was initiated into the Templars Lodge last Monday evening. Thursday evening, the ladies of the lodge gave the soldiers a supper and warmed our hearts by a general good time. The Templars Lodge, or the Masons Lodge, was actually right next door to the building here. It's actually where the expanded portion of the library is. And the Turner's Hall was actually located on Iowa Street across from where McDonald's is now, and where the city parking lot happens to exist. Besides the soldiers going into the Camp Franklin and into the war, Dubuque also had some famous publishers of local newspapers that were very well known in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. They were known by Abraham Lincoln himself, as well as all of his administration. The first being Dennis Mahoney, who was a Copperhead and a big critic of Abraham Lincoln and the Lincoln administration, was very much against the war. He ran the Dubuque Herald. He was arrested in August of 1862 and was taken by train from Dubuque to Washington, D.C., where he was imprisoned for a while. Charges were never brought against him. There was never a reason for his imprisonment, but it was part of Abraham Lincoln's greater effort of silencing newspaper editors and agitators around the United States who were speaking up against the war. One of his employees was Frank Wilkie. Wilkie was a war correspondent for the Telegraph Herald, or for the Dubuque Herald, I should say, as well as for the New York Times, and later on editor of the Chicago Times. He published in 1861 a book, The Iowa First, Letters from the War, that was rather popular, and one of the very first published books on the Civil War. It was his war correspondence from following the 1st Iowa Infantry down to the Battle of Wilson Creek, and it's just his letters and his reports from those battles. A copy of that book is located here in the library and available for reference. We also have Alexander Simplot, who was an artist for the Dubuque Herald as well as Harper's Weekly. Alexander Simplot is buried in Linwood Cemetery, and he had a very famous image that was in the May 1861 issue of Harper's Weekly. And it is a picture of the steamboat leaving the port of Dubuque with about 3,000 well-wishers. So this is a engraving that was published in Harper's Weekly from a sketch that Alexander did that he turned into a painting that then got turned into an engraving and published in Harper's Weekly. Of the Iowa First leaving the city of Dubuque. So it says, departure of volunteers from Dubuque, Iowa, April 22nd, 1861 is the caption underneath the image. The actual painting has just been restored by the Dubuque Historical Society. I believe it's on display down at the Historical Society in the Riverboat Museum. It's a wonderful picture. It's absolutely gorgeous painting and is definitely worth going and taking a look at. Besides all of Dubuque's exploits, Joe Davis County also had fame during the Civil War, not just only for U.S. Grant, as well as the regiments that they raised, but also the 9 Galena generals. I have a few of them listed here. A couple of them of note: Jasper Maltby was military mayor of Vicksburg, appointed by General Grant after the Union armies took over Vicksburg, the city of Vicksburg. John A. Rawlins was a general and aide-de-camp to General Grant from Galena. He was also a United States Secretary of War in the Grant administration. You also had Eli Parker, who was also an aide to General Grant during the war. Eli Parker was an Iroquois Indian, and he was also the personal scribe for General Grant that wrote up the terms of surrender that were signed by Grant and Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. There's a famous painting of Grant and Lee at the surrender in front of a fireplace in Wilmer McLean's front parlor. And in that picture, you can see a darker complected man standing in front of the fireplace. That darker complected man is Eli Parker, who was in the room at the time time of the signing. Most of these gentlemen are buried in Galena, Illinois. Obviously, General Grant is buried in New York City on the west side in New York. These images on the screen here as well are actual pictures of Galena, Illinois. That's a picture of General Grant as a citizen with his son Jesse in front of his father's saddlery store in Galena, Illinois. And the house is the picture of the Grant House on High Street in Galena, which is the hill on the, it would be the western side of the Fever or Galena River. The house still exists today and is still there on High Street. And then there's also the home on the other side of the river, the mansion that was given to Grant after his presidency, or after the war, I should say, from the citizens of Galena. So both structures still do exist today. This is an image that was also in Harper's Weekly in 1865. This is a picture taken from August 18th when General Grant returned to Galena, Illinois. So the war got over basically in May of 1865, and by August of 1865, Grant was back in the tri-state area, being the savior and the conqueror of the Confederacy. And so this was a parade and a tribute that was given to him in Galena to welcome him back to the city that was reported on in Harper's Weekly. 7 days later, on August 25th, Grant climbed aboard the Illinois Central Railroad and took it to Dunleith, got off, crossed the Mississippi River via ferry to the port of Dubuque, and ended up visiting the city of Dubuque for the entire day. They paraded from Jones Street at the port of Dubuque, which is the south side of the port of Dubuque, where Newt Marina is, paraded him down to Main Street by Troush's Bakery, then all the way down Main Street to 13th Street by Mario's. They took a turn down 13th Street to Iowa Street, or to Locust Street, and then they took Locust Street all the way to Washington Park. Grant gave a speech at Washington Park, and then they had a meal for him for a select group of people as a meet and greet at the Julian House, now the Julian Hotel. And he was on the train and back in Galena by 10 o'clock that night. Grant County had a variety of claims of fame to the Civil War. Obviously, the early meeting place we discussed regarding Colonel Clark, the potential birthplace of the Republican Party. We discussed a little bit the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin Infantry that were part of the Iron Brigade. The first Civil War monument in the United States actually occurred in Lancaster, Wisconsin. In 1862, the city took up a subscription to start raising money for a public monument to honor the men of the 2nd and the 7th Wisconsin Infantries who had very high casualties at the Battle of Antietam. And to memorialize those dead and wounded, they decided to erect a monument. The monument wasn't erected until 1867, but it is recognized as the first public Civil War monument in the United States and is located in Grant County, Wisconsin. And then Grant County also produced a Congressional Medal of Honor winner in Jeffrey Coates from Boscobel. Jeffrey Coates was part of the Iron Brigade. When we talk about the Congressional Medal of Honor in the tri-state area, 7 men associated with Dubuque have won the Congressional Medal of Honor, or I should more appropriately say received the Congressional Medal of Honor. I don't think you actually win it. But receive the medal for their valor and their honor and their heroism during the Civil War. 4 of those 7 men actually received the medal for service in the Civil War. 4 Dubuquers did. It's popularly believed that only 2 Dubuquers received Congressional Medal of Honors during the Civil War, that being George Washington Healy as well as Francis J. Herron. But they were not the only 2 Dubuquers to win Congressional Medal of Honors during the Civil War. Dubuque also had 2 individuals that won the Congressional Medal of Honor for fighting in the Indian Wars of 1869 out in Arizona. And then we also have a gentleman buried here in Dubuque, Surgeon Paul Frederick Straub, who was part of the Philippine-American War in 1899. He was not born or raised in Dubuque, but he did live in Dubuque and is buried here in Linwood Cemetery. So of the 7 Dubuquers with ties to Congressional Medal of Honor, it's George Washington Healy, Francis J. Herron. The 2 other Civil War vets are Orson W. Bennett and James Kephart. We also had Paul Frederick Straub, who's buried here in Dubuque from the Philippine-American War. And then George Gates and Albert Sale of Dubuque, both Dubuque born and raised, fought in the Indian Wars of 1869 and both received Congressional Medal of Honor citations for their service in those wars as well. Now, we mentioned Senator James W. Grimes, who's a Republican from Iowa, second Iowa governor, took over the Senate seat of George Wallace Jones, who Jones is buried here in Dubuque. Senator Grimes actually was the first person to propose and actually introduce the legislation to create the Congressional Medal of Honor. He did so in December of 1861 with Senate Bill number 82. And Lincoln signed that bill on December 21st, 1861, thereby creating the Congressional Medal of Honor for the Navy. Later on, 2 months later, Massachusetts Senator Henry Wilson introduced a similar bill creating the Congressional Medal of Honor for the United States Army. And so that gives us the 3 medals that we see on the screen today that make up the Congressional Medal of Honor. Of those, again, there were 4 Dubuquers who won the Congressional Medal of Honor for their service in the Civil War. 3 of them being raised in Dubuque, 2 of them, or 1 of them actually being born and raised in Dubuque. And the first one in chronological order of when they received or were awarded the medal was Lieutenant Colonel Francis J. Herron of the 9th Iowa Infantry. He won his for valor at the Battle of Pea Ridge. For bravely rallying his troops. He was wounded and later taken prisoner of war during that same battle. So he was awarded it for that battle on May 7th, 1862. It was not issued or given to him until September 26, 1893. So even though the Congressional Medal of Honor was created in late 1861, the vast majority of Civil War veterans did not receive it until the late 1880s, 1890s, and going into the 20th century. He actually received his in 1893. Something interesting about